Right, so with the genocide in Gaza still very much continuing, with more forced displacements and Israeli forces having most recently been attacking not just Rafah in the south, but also Gaza City again in the north and Khan Younis again in between, it is of no surprise we are still seeing, though admittedly it's getting harder to find in our media, the death toll in Gaza still rising. More and more we're finding ourselves reliant on foreign media to keep up to date with matters. Fortunately available online and often in English, making this a none too difficult task if, like me, you access most of your news online. But one outlet I wasn't expecting an intervention from is the very much Western-based oldest medical journal in the world weighing in on the matter of the Gaza death toll. For the Lancet, highly esteemed, peer-reviewed scientific publication that it is, has by its own assessment determined that the actual death toll in Gaza could be some 4 times higher than the Gaza Health Ministry are actually reporting. Right, so Gaza, the official death toll of Palestinians in Gaza, mainly women and children, as we know, has now passed 38,000. But according to the highly regarded Lancet, that might be a hefty underestimation. The 38,000 figure is derived from people who have been killed since October 7th by Israeli forces in Gaza. And if you think about it, that figure can only be arrived at in an official capacity if they've actually got bodies to identify. And the difficulty for the Gaza Health Ministry is that Gazan infrastructure that they rely on to collate such figures has largely been destroyed. It's become a much harder exercise to maintain their figures, to collect that data. Where normally the health ministry could rely on hospitals and deaths occurring as they do in those hospitals, as well as people who have been brought into them dead, they have now had to augment their data collection sources to include first responders and also the media, who may not be as reliable as those hospital figures would be. It has to be considered a degradation in the quality of the data collected. These sources have, just like hospitals in the course of Israeli atrocity, all been targeted, of course. And that chain of information has continued to be disrupted. And as a consequence of all of that, the health ministry has been separating those identified from hospital sources from those bodies it has not been able to identify via other sources since last May. And of those declared numbers of deaths, some 30% of them, it's estimated, remain unidentified. That data collection issue is just one aspect of this Lancet report that estimates the true death toll in Gaza could be as high as 186,000 people. So even with data collection difficulties, how can the official numbers be so far short of this Lancet estimate? Well, without a proper ceasefire to be able to check these and search for more bodies, the numbers aren't likely to move towards each other anytime soon, but the Lancet does point out where further unidentified bodies are likely to be. And actually, when you think about all of this, it does unfortunately become quite a logical conclusion, as you'd expect from a scientific and peer-reviewed publication. The Lancet simply doesn't publish stuff without sourcing and evidencing its conclusions and having them corroborated from reliable sources and people connected with them. For one, 35% of all buildings in the Gaza Strip have been reduced to rubble. Logically, there will be people who will have been buried in those buildings, therefore. The Lancet referred to another organisation when it came to asking questions about this. They turned to Air Wars, which is a non-profit transparency watchdog that tracks, assesses and investigates civilian casualties in conflict zones in order to reliably and independently, more importantly, track, document and assess the human cost of war. The Gaza Strip has been no different in that regard, and they have found that not all the names of those identified by the Gaza Health Ministry end up included in the ministry's list. Now, the Gaza Health Ministry has always had its figures held in very high regard. The quality and accuracy of its figures previously, the UN cite their accuracy as for instance, used their figures, as does the World Health Organization. Though Israel, as you might have guessed, are not quite so praiseworthy of it, although even in their case the IDF have used Gaza Health Ministry figures. So this, again, is a source of data inaccuracy and actually shows how badly the Gaza Health Ministry's ability to collect data on fatalities has become a bigger and bigger issue. It's become more difficult for them, and more of the strip gets razed to the ground. The figure of 10,000 people potentially being buried in the rubble are figures quoted in that Lancet article, and they come from the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the OCHA, whose last estimate on this came in May, and who also said it could take up to 3 years to find these people that are buried using the equipment people in Gaza have to hand at this moment in time. That's how decimated Gaza has been. That, of course, is assuming the fighting ends now. Another factor is that even when the fighting does end, there will be so many more indirect deaths And that will continue to come in the coming months and years as a result of disease, and this will arguably be the biggest killer of them all. Medical supplies interrupted, horrendous life-changing injuries to deal with, food supplies interrupted, the ability to make a living, grow food at its most basic is gone, lack of water, lack of power, lack of shelter. The knock-on effects from so many directions are devastating, and we actually hear so little about that. But taking the Gaza Health Ministry figures and attributing a ratio of 4 indirect deaths to every direct death in Gaza to arrive at their estimate, and this ratio again is based on a UN study from the UN Office of Drugs and Crime titled The Global Burden of Armed Conflict. It's a 310-page study if you care to go through the whole thing. So this is not an unreasonable guide on such matters, and that brings matters up to that 186,000 figure, which would account for roughly 8% of the entire population of the Gaza Strip. It should be noted by way of a caveat, not one erring on the side of caution here. The Lancet believes even that might be a conservative figure that they come up with. That an Action on Armed Violence Commission study from February calculated that without a ceasefire, with the death toll at that point being some 28,000 people, that's where it stood at that time, there would be an eventual death toll of some 58,000 people due to those indirect factors, and that would be assuming there would be no health epidemic or escalation in violence. Where that were to happen, the estimation for fatalities rose to more than 85,000 indirect deaths. We are now in July and matters are not abating. So what are the response to these findings then? Well, some people have been pointing out an article by left-wing outlet Plus 972 magazine entitled "I'm bored, so I shoot. The Israeli army's approval of free-for-all violence in Gaza," and with the tagline, "Israeli soldiers describe the near-total absence of firing regulations in the Gaza war, with troops shooting as they please, setting homes ablaze, and leaving corpses on the streets, all with their commander's permission." Plus 972 magazine, incidentally, is an Israeli publication. And it's impossible not to conclude after 10 months that this is not encouraged by the Israeli government and those within it, because we've heard what they've said. We know what their positions are, don't we? Your Netanyahus, your Yoav Gallants, your Itamar Ben-Gavirs, your Bezalel Smotriches, and the rest. Labour MP Zara Sultana tweeted out about this Lancet article today as well, saying, "The Lancet, the most prestigious medical journal in the world, conservatively estimates that the death toll in Gaza could be 186,000 or more. That's 8% of the population. I repeat my long-standing call for the UK government to immediately end all arms sales to Israel." She's not wrong. But you can guess what she's being called for calling this out though, can't you? Oh look, they're calling her an anti-Semite for spreading fake news. The Lancet, of all publications, fake news? You're going to have to do an awful lot better than that. Investigative journalist Asa Winstanley of Electronic Intifada has also passed comment on the Lancet's findings, saying, "I'm still reeling from the fact that the Lancet has now estimated that the real death toll in Gaza is 186,000. It's not unexpected given the reality on the ground of Israel's genocide, but no less horrifying for it." But are any Western mainstream media outlets reporting this? Nope, not one. I did, as I often do when researching a story, type in a basic search term into Google to get me going, see what people have been writing about it. I am a commentator, not a journalist after all. I comment on what media outlets are saying, see what publications have been writing about it, see what Google threw up, and in response to the search term Lancet Gaza deaths, to see what other publications have said about this article itself, which I've also read, I should add, there's nothing. The Jewish Chronicle came up in the search. They're rubbishing it, of course, because, yes, of course they're going to. But the main sources after that include the likes of Al Jazeera, Middle East Eye, Five Pillars, the Palestine Chronicle. You get the idea. The fact of the matter is, as awful as it is to think of these lives lost in terms of just raw statistics, even they are an underestimate. And we aren't being told about it except in foreign and independent media, and that continues to be absolutely scandalous. And amidst all of this, the UK government, albeit the one that has just departed, but to my knowledge Starmer is yet to quash it, has instructed lawyers to block the International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor's case against Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defence Minister Yoav Gallant from issuing arrest warrants for them, as has been called for. Starmer managed to cancel the Rwanda scheme fast enough. Why not this? And why not Israeli arms sales while he's at it? Find out all about that story in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.